Wyoming Territory, 1879. The wind howled down from the Bighorn Mountains, and on the edge of the town of Eden Ridge, the sheriff's sister was being forced into a wedding she did not want. Marigold Tatham stood stiff in her lace-trimmed dress, fists clenched tight at her sides, as the parlor filled with the scent of boiled ham and dust. Her brother, Sheriff Samuel Tatham, paced in front of the fireplace, jaw set, arms crossed. He would not look at her. "You could stop this," she said, her voice low but steady. "I gave my word," he murmured. "You know what Father left behind. The debt is real, and this is the only way to settle it. By selling me off to a stranger?" Joseph Carrick, the man she was expected to marry, stood near the window, dabbing his brow with a kerchief. He was older, maybe in his 40s, with yellowed teeth and a way of looking at her like she was already his property. He had come from Cheyenne with money and a contract. Her brother had signed it. "You will be well taken care of," Samuel said, eyes still on the fire. "He runs cattle, owns land. You will not want." "I already do," Marigold whispered. The door swung open suddenly, wind tearing through the room, and in stepped a cowboy with dust on his coat and a trail of trail-weary tired in his eyes. His boots thudded across the wooden floor as he took his hat off, revealing tousled dark hair and sharp green eyes. "I heard there's a wedding," he said, voice calm, but steady as a drawn rifle. Joseph frowned. "Who the hell are you?" "My name's Isaiah Prescott," the cowboy said. "And I have a problem with this arrangement." Sheriff Tatham stepped forward. "This is not your concern, mister. You have no business here." Isaiah's eyes flicked to Marigold, and something in his face softened. "I do now." Marigold blinked at him, confused. "Why?" Isaiah looked straight at her. "Because you were my first kiss under the apple tree behind the schoolhouse. Because I rode out to Montana looking for work and came back too late to stop your father's debts. Because I never stopped thinking about you. And I am not going to let you get handed off to a man who treats you like livestock." Joseph barked a laugh. "She's mine now. This is settled." Isaiah stepped closer. "Only if she says yes." Marigold stared at him, mouth open. Her heart pounded so loud she could barely hear anything else. Her hands trembled at her sides. "She does not get to say yes or no," Joseph snapped. "We have a signed agreement." Isaiah turned to Marigold. "Do you want to marry him?" She looked at her brother, at the contract on the table, at Joseph's smug face. Then she looked at Isaiah. He looked tired, dusty, and road-worn, but his eyes were steady, and she remembered the boy who had given her a carved wood bird the day his family left town. "No," she said, voice firm. "I do not want to marry him." Joseph lunged for her, but Isaiah was faster. His fist connected with Joseph's jaw with a solid crack, sending the man sprawling into a chair. Sheriff Tatham reached for his holster, but Isaiah raised both hands. "No guns, Sheriff," he said. "I am not here for blood. I am here for her." Samuel hesitated, then lowered his hand. "You are not fixing anything, Isaiah." "I am not trying to fix anything," Isaiah said. "I am just giving her a choice." Isaiah turned to Marigold again. "Come with me. I have a little land outside town near the river. It is not much, but it is ours if you want it. We can make something honest out of it. Together." Marigold looked at her brother. "If I go, are you going to come after me?" He looked at her long and hard, then shook his head. "You are a grown woman, Mari. I will not stop you." Joseph groaned from the floor. Marigold stepped over him, without a second glance. She took Isaiah's hand. They walked out into the wind together. The sky above Eden Ridge was wide and endless, and for the first time in years, Marigold felt like she could breathe. Isaiah's cabin was small but clean. The roof did not leak, and the floorboards were solid. Marigold sat at the table while he boiled water for coffee, her hands wrapped around the warmth of the mug he passed her. "I meant what I said," he told her. "I do not want you for a debt. I want you because I have wanted you for a long time. She looked at him closely. Do you mean to marry me? He smiled faintly. Not unless you want that too. Marigold looked out the window. The last light of the day turned the sky gold. Her fingers grazed the carved wooden bird he had found in his chest. He had kept it all these years. I do, she said. Isaiah looked up fast. Are you sure? She nodded. I would rather live in a cabin with you than in a mansion with a man like Carrick. I want a life where I am seen, where I am loved. He walked to her, knelt beside her chair, and took her hand. I see you, he said, and I already love you. She leaned forward and kissed him, her lips soft and sure. And for the first time since her father's death, she felt like her life was finally her own. The river behind Isaiah's land ran shallow, through the cottonwoods that spring, its waters clear and cold. Marigold stood at its edge one morning with her skirts tucked high, collecting smooth stones in her apron. Isaiah had said they'd line the path to the porch with them, maybe plant hollyhocks along the sides. She liked the idea of a house with flowers. He was splitting fence posts up near the ridge, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, his hat tossed on a stump. The sound of the axe echoed in slow rhythm, steady as a heartbeat. She watched for a moment before turning back to the water, choosing another stone with a rounded edge and warm, reddish hue. Later, she brought him water in a tin cup, and he leaned against the post he'd just set, sweat darkening the collar of his undershirt. Fence's coming along, she said, passing him the cup. I reckon it'll keep in the goats, once I get the wire strung. You don't have goats. He took a long drink. Not yet. She sat on the grass, stretching her legs out in front of her. Did you always want this? He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Land of my own? Always figured it'd be a long shot. But I got this patch for cheap from a man heading back east. Said the winters were too hard. She looked up at the sky, cloudless and high. I think I could stand the winters, if I had someone to get through them with. Isaiah set the cup down and sat beside her. My ma used to say, you can't build a life on hope alone. You need hands in the soil and someone who'll keep the fire going when the wind starts to howl. Sounds like your ma was wise. She was quiet, but she didn't bend, even when times got lean. Marigold plucked a blade of grass and twisted it between her fingers. Mine never got the chance. She died when I was 9. After that, I think I stopped believing I'd ever get to choose anything for myself. Isaiah reached out, not to touch her, but to rest his hand on the grass between them. You chose me. I did. She looked at him fully now. You're not sorry, are you? He shook his head. Every time I look at that old bird I carved, I remember how you cried when I gave it to you. Not because it was good, it wasn't, but because you thought someone had noticed you. I did cry, she said, smiling slightly, and I kept it under my pillow for years. My brother thought it was a charm to keep dreams away. Did it work? Only the bad ones. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that didn't press or pull, the kind that felt earned. I want to start building the chicken run tomorrow, he said at last. There's a woman near Rollins who sells hens. I thought we could ride out together and pick some. Marigold nodded. I'd like that. I've never picked out hens before. Well, now's your chance. As the sun dropped low, they walked back to the cabin. He carried the axe, and she carried the stones from the riverbed. They didn't speak again until they reached the porch. She turned to him. If you're going to keep building fences and coops, I think I ought to learn how to make bread that doesn't break teeth. I'll eat whatever you make, he said, even if it could be used for ammunition. He gave a quiet laugh. That'd be a sight. You throw your biscuits, I'll shoot. She smiled, and for the second time that day, she felt something settle inside her that had never settled before. Not safety, exactly. Something quieter. Something like belonging. The morning they rode out to Rollins, the wind came from the west, dry with the scent of distant sage. Marigold rode Isaiah's second horse, a mild-tempered bay he called Larkspur, its gait smooth enough even across the rocky flats. She wore her brother's old trail coat over her dress, the sleeves rolled and pinned to fit. Isaiah had packed jerky and dried apples, and they shared them mid-morning by a low butte where the prairie stretched out like stitched cloth. They didn't speak much on the ride. Isaiah watched the land as though he knew it better each mile, and Marigold let the rhythm of the horse lull her. Rollins was still 8 miles out when they stopped at a small ranch on a rise, smoke curling lazy from a stone chimney. Isaiah dismounted first and called out, "Mrs. Riley?" A woman stepped out with an iron poker in hand. She was short, hair gray and pinned in a tight coil, her boots caked with ash. "Well, I'll be Isaiah Prescott. Thought you'd gone and married that girl from the general store in Lander." "She married a blacksmith from Utah," Isaiah said. "This here's Marigold Tatham. She's with me now." Marigold nodded politely. Mrs. Riley squinted at her. "You look like that sheriff's sister, the one folks were talking about last week." "I am," Marigold said, keeping her voice even. Mrs. Riley looked between them, then nodded once.
"Fine.
Come round back. I've got 6 hens that won't stop pecking each other. You can have your pick." They followed her past a barn with a sun-faded sign nailed above a loft door. The coop sat behind a crooked fence, feathers caught on the wire and fluttering in the breeze. Isaiah crouched to inspect the birds, watching them scratch and cluck and shift warily. "You've run hens before?" Mrs. Riley asked him. "Only helped with my paws when I was a boy. But I've built the roost, and I've got feed ready." Marigold knelt beside a fat, speckled one. "This one looks mean." Mrs. Riley laughed. "That's Agnes. She's outlived 3 roosters and a fox. She'll give you eggs and attitude." Isaiah glanced up. "You want her?" Marigold gave a small grin. "I think I do." They picked 4 more, 2 red-feathered, one pale as bone, another with a crooked toe and paid in coin, and a promise to bring back a sack of flour from town. Mrs. Riley helped pack the hens into crates, and by early afternoon, they were back on the trail, the birds rustling and muttering behind them. As they rode, Marigold shifted in the saddle. "Did you mean what you said back there? That I'm with you now?" Isaiah kept his eyes ahead. "I did." "Then I want to be clear," she said. "I don't want to be someone you rescued. That may be how it started, but it's not how I want it to stay." He looked over at her, reins slack in his hand. "What do you want it to be?" "A full thing. Equal. Worked for." He nodded. "That's what I want too." They passed a stand of juniper, the scent sharp, and the sun sliding down behind them. The sky turned the color of ripe peaches, and the land took on a hush, like breath held at the end of a long day. When they reached the cabin again, Isaiah carried the crates while Marigold opened the coop. She set down fresh water, and the hens blinked at her, wary but curious. Agnes pecked the ground once, then strutted in like she owned the place. Later, Marigold rolled dough while Isaiah lit the lamps. The cabin flickered with golden light, and the wind outside lifted the roof's edge just enough to whisper. "Tomorrow," she said, shaping the dough into rounds, "I want to try planting onions." Isaiah leaned against the doorframe. "We'll need to turn the soil. There's a spot near the east fence that gets good light." She looked up. "Will you show me how?" He nodded. "First thing." She set the bread to rise and wiped her hands on a cloth. He crossed the room and laid a hand on her shoulder, his fingers warm against the fabric. "You were right," he said. "This isn't a rescue. This is a start." She looked up into his face, and for the first time since stepping out of her father's house, she felt the future pulling toward her, not away. "We'll make it," she said. "We already are," he answered. The first frost came late that year, creeping in one morning with a brittle hush that clung to the grass and curled the edges of the garden rows. Marigold stepped outside in her shawl and rubbed her arms as she crossed the coop. Agnes gave a low, indignant cluck, but left a warm brown egg in the straw. Inside, Isaiah was sharpening a draw knife by the hearth, his shirt collar still damp from washing. The scent of iron and ash lingered in the air. "We'll need to bring in the squash today," Marigold said, setting the egg on the table. "Leaves are going soft already." Isaiah tested the blade against his thumb pad. "I'll dig the rest of the trench for the root cellar after that. We'll need the space come deep or cold." Marigold unlatched the cupboard and took down the flour sack. "I can start drying the beans once they're pulled. Used to help the kitchen girls at the schoolhouse string them up with thread and broom handles." Isaiah set the draw knife aside. "You ever think about going back to teaching?" She measured the flour by eye. "Not to a classroom. But maybe one day, if we have children, I'd want them to learn their letters for me first." He stood and crossed to the stove, stoking the fire with practiced ease. "You'd be good at it. Patient in a way most folks aren't." She folded her hands. "You want children?" He met her eyes. "Ida. Not because I think we're supposed to, but because I want more of this. More mornings with you. More to build toward." A silence passed between them, not uncertain, just full. Marigold turned back to the mixing bowl. "Then we'll start with beans and squash." They worked until the sun rose above the ridge. The earth was stiff but not yet frozen, and Isaiah's boots left dull prints in the soil. Marigold tied her apron high and knelt near the vines, slicing the stems with a curved knife she'd found in the shed. "You ever think about your mother?" Isaiah asked as he laid the squash in a sack. "Sometimes," she said. "She had a voice like wind through reeds. Never raised it, even when father drank too much or Sam tracked in mud." Isaiah wiped his brow with his sleeve. "My father used to sing to the cows when he was in his cups. Real soft, like he thought they'd judge his pitch." Marigold laughed once. "Did they?" Judging by the milk yields, they didn't mind. She sat back on her heels. "It's strange, what we remember." Isaiah knelt beside her, resting his forearms on his knees. "I remember your braid. At school. It always had bits of hay in it. I used to sit in the loft after chores. Felt like the only place that belonged to me." "Now you've got a whole house," he said. "And a ridge of your own." She reached out, brushing a bit of dirt from his cheek with her thumb. "And you." He leaned in and kissed her, slow and sure. It wasn't hurried, not pressed by anything but the simple joy of being where they were. When they parted, his hand found hers in the dirt. That evening, Isaiah brought in the last of the firewood while Marigold hung the beans from a length of twine stretched between the rafters. The light outside dimmed to blue, and the sound of the wind softened against the walls. Marigold lit the lamp and turned to him. "You ever miss the trail?" He pulled off his boots, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Sometimes. But it's not the same now. I used to ride just to feel like I was moving toward something I couldn't name. Now I know what I was riding toward." She crossed the floor and sat beside him. "You found it." He looked at her, his face quiet but full. "I did." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and he reached for the quilt without a word. As the wind curled around the eaves, they settled into the warmth of the room they had made, the life they had chosen. No promises were spoken. None were needed. The fire burned low, and the hush that followed was not empty, but whole. By early November, the last of the onions were hanging from the rafters, braided in long ropes that swayed faintly when the wind brushed the cabin seams. Isaiah had finished the root cellar, its trapdoor fitted flush with the floor and sealed tight with a latch he'd carved from scrap pine. Marigold had lined it with straw and shelves for the jars they'd filled pickled beans, preserved squash, and vinegar-stewed apples. The days shortened, the light thinning early, and each evening they worked by lamplight. Isaiah was carving a cedar cradle with quiet focus, smoothing the curve of its rocker when Marigold came in from the well, her shawl wrapped against the cold. He looked up when she set the bucket down. "How far along do you think?" She unpinned her scarf. "I'm late by nearly a full moon." He set the draw knife aside, his hands pausing on the unfinished arc of the cradle. "You certain?" She nodded, letting out a breath that left her chest lighter than it had in days. "I waited to be sure. I didn't want to speak too soon." He stood and crossed to her, brushing a strand of hair from her temple. "You're all right with it?" "I am," she said, her voice steady. "I don't feel afraid. Not with you." He kissed her forehead, then rested his cheek against hers, the warmth of it grounding them both. "I'll finish the cradle by week's end. You don't have to rush." "I want to." They slept close that night, Isaiah's hand resting lightly at her side, their breath moving in time. Outside, the first snow came quiet as ash, laying a soft hush over the ridge. When morning came, the world was whitewashed, the trees bare and glassed in frost. Isaiah shoveled a path to the coop while Marigold mixed cornmeal and lard, the smell of baking rising warm through the rafters. Agnes refused to come out of the henhouse, and Marigold laughed, calling her a coward under her breath. Later, Isaiah unpacked a trunk from the loft, the one he'd never opened since returning from Montana. Inside were his mother's recipe cards, a pair of worn leather gloves, and a bundle of letters tied in twine. He set the letters aside and handed the gloves to Marigold. "These were hers," he said. "I think they'll fit you." She slipped one on. "They're warm." She wore them when she'd walk the fence line in winter. Said they were thick enough to keep the wind from finding her fingers. Marigold flexed her hands, then reached for his. "When the baby comes, I want to name her after someone who stood their ground." He tilted his head. "You thinking of your mother?" "I was thinking of yours," she said. "But we could use both. Maybe not plain. Maybe something like Eleanor Ruth." Isaiah nodded slowly. "That'd be a fine name." The cradle came together over days of snowbound quiet, each piece shaped by hand, the joints fitted without nails. He oiled the wood with beeswax and linseed, letting it dry near the stove. When it was done, Marigold lined it with a scrap of quilt she'd pieced from old shirts, the blue one he wore the day they rode to Rawlins, the pale cotton she'd worn baking their first bread. One morning, she woke before dawn with a slow ache in her back and a quiet certainty that time had come. Isaiah helped her to the bed, lit every lamp, and placed water to boil while the snow fell thick outside. He stayed close, his hands steady, his voice low. She bore down through the pain, sweat slicking her brow, teeth pressed hard against linen. By mid-morning, the cries filled the cabin clear, strong, undeniable. He wrapped the child in wool and tucked her into Marigold's arms. "She's here," he said, his voice rough with wonder. "She's perfect." Marigold's eyes filled, not with fear, but with something older and deeper like recognition. "Eleanor Ruth," she whispered. "You made it." Isaiah sat beside them, his arm around her shoulders, the cradle waiting just behind them. Snow still fell, but inside, the fire burned bright, and the air was warm with new breath. Years passed. The garden grew outward, hemmed by taller fences and bordered with lavender. Isaiah built a second room onto the cabin, then a third. Marigold taught Eleanor her letters by firelight, tracing words with her finger pressed to the page. Isaiah showed her how to set a fence post straight, how to hold a hammer steady. Neighbors came in spring to help raise a barn, and stayed for stew thickened with beans and wild thyme. Marigold's brother, Samuel, visited once, hat in hand, his voice quieter than it used to be. He brought cloth for the child and stayed through supper, sleeping on the porch bench with a blanket tucked tight. Eleanor grew tall and sure-footed, quick to laugh, slow to anger. She favored her mother's quiet steadiness, but her father's way of watching the land like it spoke in a language made just for him. Isaiah aged into the lines around his eyes, his hair threaded with silver. Marigold's hands grew calloused and sure, her voice low and even, worn in the way of women who've chosen their lives fully and without regret. One evening, long after the first frost of the 15th winter, Isaiah pulled her close on the porch as the stars came out. "You ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't walked into that parlor?" She leaned into his chest, her breath warm against his collar.
No.
"I only ever think about what did." He kissed her temple, her hair still soft beneath his lips. "You saved me just as much." She smiled against him. "We built something better than saving." And they had. A life shaped not by escape, but by choosing. The wind passed over the land, sweeping down from the mountains, and the stars blinked steady overhead. Inside, the cradle sat empty now, tucked in the corner with a quilt folded neat across it. The fire crackled low, and the windows glowed gold against the dark. They stayed like that until the cold deepened and the night settled full. Two souls wrapped in the life they'd made, hand in hand, heart to heart together. Always.